everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So today I am channeling all of my Halloween vibes to give you a Halloween suggested reading list. I tried to get in the vibe for Halloween since it is right around the corner. However, I realized I have no fangs, no witches hats, so I'm just trying to channel the vibes of both of those to give this look some merit today. I don't know if it's working, but I'm rolling with it anyway. So today I'm going to give some recommendations to read on Halloween night to kind of get you into that spooky vibe slash bump in the night feeling if you're staying in this Halloween. This list is going to comprise of a variety of different novels, from ones that just have a general creepy atmosphere to some thrillers, some classics, and just a few that I think just fit the theme of Halloween. So let's just jump right into it. So the first recommendation I'm going to have today is a YA thriller, and that will be Bad Girls with Perfect Faces by Lynn Weingarten. So this book follows a girl named Sasha who breaks up with her boyfriend Xavier when Xavier decides to get back with his ex Ivy. Sasha is kind of an outcast, and she looks at Ivy as someone who has everything and is kind of like a prissy high school girl. So Sasha tries to hatch a plan to shake Ivy from Xavier because she thinks Xavier is in danger from Ivy and she needs to protect him. So Sasha goes undercover to try to make Ivy cheat on Xavier electronically, so through text messages and stuff like that, but ends up kind of getting into this weird hole where Sasha's pretending to be someone, Ivy's pretending to be someone else, and Xavier is caught in the middle. So it kind of follows those three characters, and what unfolds is a bit of a thriller mystery plot. I think this is perfect if you're just getting into the thriller genre because, like I said, it is young adult, so it's not as twisty and turny, I think, as some of the adult thrillers. It was still a fun and easy read. I definitely think it could be one of these books that if, like I said, if you've read a lot of thrillers, this might be one that you will probably predict every twist and turn. But there was one turn in here that I actually was kind of like, oh, I didn't think you were going to take that direction, but you did. So I think I ended up giving this like a 3.5 stars. Like I said, not the highest book I've rated, but definitely enjoyable. And I think it kind of gives you that quick and fast-paced thriller vibe that is perfect for Halloween. To follow up that book, I'm going to recommend an adult thriller, and that is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. So this is a pretty popular book now, especially after the HBO series debuted. And I think it was this year already? Oh man. But there's an HBO series which is really, really well done if you have the ability to watch that series. Sharp Objects follows Camille Preaker, a journalist in a big city who is asked to go back to her hometown to start investigating the murders of various young girls in her hometown. Camille has a very checkered past with her own family history being darker than she would like to remember, and she's kind of plagued by mental health and dependency now. But she goes back home to investigate the deaths of these girls and finds out that these deaths might be closer to her own past than she wants to admit. Again, I actually think this is the first and currently only Gillian Flynn book I have read, but I absolutely loved it. I think Gillian Flynn did a really good job executing and weaving the kind of two storylines that are going on because, again, you're following Camille's journey as well as the murders of these young girls in her town, and I think they're woven very well together. Again, it is kind of creepy, and there's actually one part of this book towards the end, which I can't give it away, but I actually was like cringing reading it because it was very descriptive and disturbing. It's not extremely graphic, but what I would say for this one is there is, if you can tell by the cover itself, there is self-harm in it. So if you are triggered by self-harm, you probably should not read this book. My next recommendation is actually a relatively older series at this point. It came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I think it did continue afterwards, but I haven't read the continuation. But that would be In the Forest of the Night by Amelia Atwater Rhodes, and the rest of the series, Demon in My View, Midnight Predator, and Shattered Mirror. These are the original 4 books that I read in this series. In this series, you follow 4 different girls throughout each book, and their stories intertwine with the vampires and the witches in this world. They are kind of known in this world, but they're very mysterious and not a lot of people know about them. What I love about this series is it's just super fun to read. Now, like I said, I haven't actually read this in a while, and I'm probably due for a reread, to be honest. But I just remember this series so vividly, and there are certain descriptions and characters that I just always think back of when I'm in the mood to read some kind of vampire witchy novels. I think they're very accessible for everyone, whether you're a young reader or an adult. They're also really short, so I think each book is like about 200 pages, give or take. So if you wanted to sit down on Halloween and read this, you could definitely do that. Honestly, I might do that now. But I definitely think these are underrated. I particularly think out of all 4 of these series, Demon in My View is probably the most known of the 4. It was actually the 2nd book published, and when I first started getting into this, it was a series recommended to me a long time ago. I had only gotten this one first, and then realized that technically, if you're going in publication order, In the Forest of the Night was first. But the other fun thing about this is that you can literally read this series in any order you want. Like I said, it's a really quick read, and it's just kind of that fun, atmospheric book to get you into the Halloween vibe, because what better way to celebrate Halloween than with vampires and witches, and maybe a little bit of romance. The next book I have to recommend is a classic, and that would be And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. I don't know why you haven't. So this actually was recommended to me in high school. I remember being in 11th grade, and we had kind of a reading club group that the honors English class decided to just do after school once a month. I remember we were all sharing the books we were currently reading, and this one girl had recommended it to me, and it was the first time I had ever heard of Agatha Christie, which kind of blows my mind when I think I went 11 grades without ever hearing of her, but that was what happened. So anyway, And Then There Were None follows this group of people who end up being invited to a private island, and while they're at the island, some strange things start happening and people keep disappearing. So it kind of follows, there's an old nursery rhyme called The 10 Little Indians, and in that rhyme, so every time an Indian disappears in the story, someone else disappears on this island resort. You kind of try to figure out it's a whodunit mystery novel, but it's just so good. And I've actually, since I've read this, I have not read any other Agatha Christie, but I've started collecting them so that I can power through them. So my next read is going to be a young adult novel, and that would be The Wicked Deep by Shea Earnshaw. Now, if you follow big booktubers, I know this book is nothing new, but I absolutely adored it. The story of The Wicked Deep starts a couple centuries earlier when these 3 sisters who are known to do herbs and help the town people are accused of being witches. After the townsfolk accuse the sisters of being witches, the sisters kind of have different reactions, but ultimately the townsfolk win and they drown the sisters in the bay. Since their death, there's always been kind of a curse over this town where every summer for about a 3-week period, these sisters come back to seek revenge on the town for what they did to them so long ago. The season is named the Swan Season for the Swan Sisters, and it's said that they come and roam the earth for those 3 weeks, take the soul of a boy and drown them in the ocean. The story really starts off by following Penny, who is a teenager and is experiencing this season. A mysterious new boy comes to town named Beau, and Penny and Beau kind of embark on this journey to figure out if the story and the legends were true and how to stop it. I give Shea Earnshaw all the credit in the world. I think this book really embodies that deep, atmospheric, creepy vibe. She has such a way with description in this book, and I was blown away and so sucked in. I also think that her history of the sisters, which is kind of like woven into the story, you would get like the chapter on Penny, and then you get like a history a little bit of the three sisters. And that was so fascinating. If she wrote just a book on that, I would buy it instantly. This book does have some flaws to it. It's not going to be perfect, and I know some people did complain about the ending a little bit. It was a little bit fast-paced, and there was kind of a plot twist that some people thought was distasteful. Personally, I didn't mind it at all. I was just so absorbed in everything else that I was okay giving that a pass. But if you are in the mood for some witchy siren vibes, I highly recommend The Wicked Deep. So my next recommendation is another classic, and that will be Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Frankenstein is one of the few classics I have read and absolutely loved. I did not read it until I was in college because I was forced to read it for a class, but I am very glad that I did. If you don't know what Frankenstein's about, essentially you're following Dr. Frankenstein, who is a scientist who ends up discovering how to piece body parts together to create a new living being, just called the monster. The monster ends up kind of taking on its own life and personality, and there's a lot of dynamic between Frankenstein and his monster and the hurts that Frankenstein ended up doing and vice versa. The story is definitely, for me, I do not get scared for anything, so take that with a grain of salt. But I don't think this is a necessarily scary novel. I think the movies probably would give you more scare. But it's just the dynamic and the feel and the environment that is put into this novel that makes it a great recommendation for Halloween. It's also something that goes way more into depth about life and death and where we lie on the spectrum of the universe, particularly with playing God and your actions making those around you impacted as well. If you haven't read this, I definitely recommend, obviously. And it's definitely one to pick up during the spooky season. So the next book I have to recommend is a gothic mystery thriller kind of book, and that would be The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfeld. This book, man, is this book creepy and atmospheric. So the 13th Tale follows a biographer named Margaret who is summoned to do the biography of this very elusive woman named Vida Winter. Vida has always made a living out of creating these lush and dynamic stories, but no one really knows what's truth and what's fiction. So as Margaret is diving into the history, she starts to fall under Vida's storytelling spell and has to kind of distinguish what is real and what's fiction. A lot of creepy things also start to happen while she is in the grips of storytelling. It's a very, very interesting story, and it's one that's going to keep you on the edge of your seat and also probably have you wondering what the hell is happening for the majority of the book. But at the end, everything comes together, and I just remember being so blown away by the ending of this book that I had to put it down and was like, how do I go on again? It's like I said, it's a gothic literature, and I actually did read this for a gothic lit class in college. And the kind of creepy without being explained fully vibes are extremely strong in this. So if you like books that kind of have that edge of, is this reality or is it paranormal or is it the imagination, I would recommend this book for you. It's definitely, I would say, not for everyone, just because it can get very confusing. And this is an adult book. So if you are a little bit younger or you're just not into like this kind of gothic adult genre, might not be the best story. But either way, I would definitely recommend it. And at this point, I would say it's probably close to being a classic itself because it's just that good. My next recommendation is going to be The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. The Hazelwood is a young adult gothic fantasy novel that follows 17-year-old Alice and her mother. So Alice has always been on the run with her mother from her grandmother's legacy. Alice's grandmother was a very prominent storyteller who was most famous for this collection of fairy tale-esque stories that were kind of creepy and ended up really not having any kind of moral to them, like the classic ones like Hans Christian Andersen or Grimm's fairy tales. where they have kind of a point to them. Alice's grandmother's stories never really had a point. They just happened and you were supposed to accept them. And they ended up being like a cult favorite, but Alice's grandmother never wrote anything else after that. One day, Alice's grandmother dies, and she has requested that Alice return to the Hazelwood, her grandmother's estate. But her mother doesn't want her to go. But then her mother goes missing, so Alice pretty much has to confront that the Hazelwood and this mysterious legacy of her grandmother has a role to play in her mother's disappearance. So she teams up with a friend from school and ends up journeying back to the Hazelwood, where she ends up finding that her grandmother's stories had more to them than met the eye. I absolutely love this book. This is another one that I think was hit or miss for people, but Melissa Albert's writing just created such a great creepy environment. It kept me on the edge of my seat, and the whole fairy tale aspect of this book was so well executed and definitely reminded me of some of the old classics like Hans and Grimm, where you just kind of got sucked into them, but you didn't really want to stay too long because they didn't have the best outcomes. Essentially what happened with this as well. This book is also getting a sequel soon, so I'm very excited to dive back into the world. But overall, this is the epitome of creepy Halloween vibes. And if you just look at this cover, I mean, the cover itself screams Halloween because you have some bones and feathers and bird cages and daggers. It is a very, very well done book that will set you in the Halloween mood. So the last book and series that I have to recommend is The Diviners by Libba Bray. Now, I am solely recommending this book because of the first book, The Diviners, as that's the only one I've read so far. But the entire series has the same vibe from what I understand. So if you've already read the first one and haven't continued, then I just recommend going to do that anyway. The Diviners follows a teenager named Evie O'Neill in the Roaring 20s, New York City, when Evie is exiled from her lush New York City home and is forced to live with her uncle, who is kind of obsessed with the occult. Evie gets really worried being with her uncle because she herself has a strange gift when she touches objects and gets glimpses of that object's history. Of course, this can lead her into trouble because she starts to see things that no one really should know, such as serial killers and murderers. Evie ends up joining with a bunch of other kids who have kind of similarly weird histories, and they embark on a journey to solve these cryptic messages left by a on-the-loose serial killer. This series was definitely, out of this entire list, the most atmospheric book I've ever read. Especially if you listen to the audiobook. I just remember washing dishes thinking like, oh my God, like I just need to go like hide under my covers right now because of how creepy the vibe was. And the audiobook in particular has an excellent narrator. So if you're looking for something to listen to on Halloween, this is my go-to recommendation. I think the author, Libba Bray, did a phenomenal job with her research for this novel. Not only did she get the setting absolutely perfect, but the language and the actions of all of the characters fit so well into this era that you actually feel like you're not only in the 1920s, but also investigating a murder. The whole villain of the first book was probably one of the creepiest villains I've ever read. And again, when you listen to the audiobook, the villain is 10 times creepier than if I think you were just reading it on a page. But overall, I think this one is definitely one to consider reading on Halloween. But it is very, very hefty. It's a big book, so you probably wouldn't be able to finish it on Halloween. But if you're looking for something to start or read up into Halloween, this is probably a good go-to. All right, everyone, so those are my reading recommendations for Halloween. Let me know in the comments below if you have read any of these books already, or if you have other suggestions. I would love to know because I'm always in the mood to read some spooky things on Halloween. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.